Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories from cemeteries. I also have the pleasure of being joined by our collaborator tonight, Miss Creepy Tales. If you enjoy their work, feel free to check out their channel. Link can be found in the description. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I come from a single-parent family. My mum met my dad, and when they fell pregnant with me, my dad quickly disappeared, and my mum had no way of getting in contact with him, as this was a number of years ago now. So it was me, my mum, and my grandma. We all lived together in the same house, and we were quite close-knit when I was young. She wasn't even that old, Grandma, I think around 60, when she suddenly died. That was the worst part. It was extremely unexpected. When I was older, I learned that she had a heart attack. The hardest thing to hear, though, was that she was at home when it happened. I was at daycare, and Mum was at work, and it was when Mum came back that she found her, already dead, trying to make it to the phone. Had she reached it, this story may never have happened. But she died, and I was 6. The day of her funeral came, and as any child would tell you, I found it very boring. I know you're not supposed to say that, but as a 6-year-old, that's how I felt. My mum, as you can imagine, was absolutely devastated. Her shoulders shook the whole time. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't know if it was allowed. She had a tissue in both hands, like it was the only thing keeping her together. We relied partially on Grandma's income to help supplement us so that we could all live together. Not only was she losing her mum, but we also were about to lose our house, as there was no way that she could afford the mortgage on that place, which was such a shame because she had just a little bit to go. So, as you can imagine, a single mum with absolutely zero support now, trying to do everything by herself and her world crumbling around her, I understand. I'd be devastated too. And I sat there at the funeral for a long time. It was outdoors, and Grandma's coffin was awaiting to be put into the ground. People were saying a few words, and I was honestly bored. That's when I noticed something up ahead. I could see colours past the tree line. I squinted and noticed a child's park, a playground. I moved over to the side so that I could get a better view, and it was empty. So, I slowly backed away, me in my all-black dress, looking terribly out of place, running towards this colourful park. I looked around, and there was no one there. The chain-link fence and trees were the only thing separating this burial ground. Just as I was about to reach it, I looked back tentatively. Was my mum all right? Had she noticed I was gone? Had anyone? But the small crowd of people were mostly just gathered around my mum, who didn't speak and who just sat there staring at the coffin. So, off I went. I ran straight to the swings. I climbed on top and started swinging. The thing is, though, I had always relied on other people to push me while swinging. So I was trying my best to do it alone, but soon found it quite tedious and boring. And just as I was about to stand up and get off the swing, did I hear someone come from behind me. They said, "Can I push you?" Delightedly, I said yes. He pushed, and I was going higher and higher. I didn't really see his face clearly because the sun was behind him, and he looked like someone's dad, and wearing a baseball cap. After a few pushes that were really fun, suddenly I started to lose all momentum, and it started going back and forth with no more pushes. I looked around, and he said, "I bet you can't catch me," and began running. You remember the chain-link fence and trees? That was the direction he was running towards the funeral. It made me a bit afraid. I wasn't entirely sure if I should be going back, because if someone saw me, surely they'd drag me back to the boring funeral. But I complied. I ran after him giggling, and I noticed him go by some bushes near where the cars were parked. I ran into the bush to try and tag him, but he was gone. I blinked confused, and then before I knew it, arms were around me, lifting me. At first I didn't understand. I thought perhaps it was part of the game. But he began walking very quickly towards a blue car, parked, as it would happen, right near the entrance of the funeral home. I don't know if he had put two and two together yet and was trying to take me before someone from the funeral noticed. But, seeing as I'm telling this story, it obviously didn't work. I had started to get scared. Why was he taking me into his car? He fumbled with his keys, and I screamed and started to kick. And then everything happened in a really short amount of time. A shout, footsteps pounding, and then bam. My mum's fist hit his face so hard I thought she'd fall with him. He let go of me instantly, and I stumbled backwards and landed on the concrete, watching as she hit him again and again. Then other people came running, uncles, cousins, and people I didn't even know. They began kicking him, punching him, and I just sat there watching this immense display of violence. He didn't even say a word. He didn't even put his arms up to defend himself. Maybe they were getting some of the grief out on this creep. I'm not entirely sure how long the pounding lasted, but my mum stopped beating on the man while others continued. She picked me up and took me back to the funeral. I don't remember much else after that. My mum just held me crying in the car before we were going home. I didn't understand what had happened, not really. It wasn't until years later when I was older, when Mum finally told me what was going on in our city at the time. Kids who disappeared, the vans, stories on the news. She told me that she'd lost her mother that week, and nearly her daughter too. And I still think about that swing sometimes, about how innocent it all felt, how fast that feeling vanished, and how close I came to disappearing forever. Let me start off by saying I wish this were fake. I never really had any paranormal experiences besides the occasional thinking you hear something that isn't there. I've lived next to a Civil War graveyard for nearly 6 years, and I've never had any experience or cool stories to share. But I do now. There was nothing special about last weekend. Everything felt normal. I carried out my daily routine, waking up, feeding the dogs, spot cleaning the house, and catching up on a random show on Netflix. Then evening came. I hadn't been any more productive, so I decided I would take the dogs for a walk, and they happily ran to the door for me to harness them up. We began our walk at around 7:30 and decided to take a different route around the elementary school that was across the street from the graveyard. Why someone would put an elementary school across from a graveyard, I have no idea. We loop around the school and then around the graveyard after, since there's a sidewalk that makes a perfect circle around, and the dogs also love watching the birds near the graves. There are always so many. We're walking around and are on our second lap when I feel a tug on my shirt that I shrugged off. As stupid as it sounds, I decided it was cool to carry a backpack, thinking I could bring snacks and drinks and spend a good while outdoors. I mention this to lead to the reason that sparked my suspicions of foul play. After shrugging off the tug on my shirt, I later felt something was lifted and dropped in my backpack while I was standing still. I again felt it was weird and shrugged it off and came back with a reasonable excuse or explanation as to why. It had to be a water bottle or something. I finished our 5th lap and stopped for some water before heading home. I reached around and brought my backpack in front of me to find it unzipped. I again paid it no mind and drank my water and went home. I let the dogs run inside, and I went to the bathroom to start a shower. I had started feeling a bit weird in the shower. I figured it was heat exhaustion, so I switched the water to cool, and then I felt something scrape straight down the middle of my back, and I lost it. I never believed in the whole paranormal thing, but as I jumped out of the shower, I noticed all of my clothes were now missing from the bathroom, and the door handle was stuck. I finally got it open and ran straight to my bedroom and locked the door. The dogs followed me and were growling low at the door, and it felt as if my back were on fire. I ignored it because I was terrified and thought someone broke into the house or was messing with me. I heard a whining noise outside of the door, followed by what sounded like an old guy laughing creepily. This continued for what felt like forever, but in reality was maybe 2 minutes at most. I then heard a loud thud at the door. I waited a while, and then opened it up to see my backpack thrown at my door. I dragged it in and locked the door once more. Inside my bag flowed from the gravesite 4th of July flowers. My stomach dropped and I actually puked. I grabbed my phone and called my husband. He got home fairly quickly, and we watched the cameras to see nothing. We have indoor cameras as well. You can see the bag being thrown against the door, but the footage was weird. It glitched only to show it hit the door. The whole thing has been eating at me and keeping me up. I keep dreaming of a dark figure and laughter. I can't wrap my head around it, and even went to stay with my mum for a few days after. I'm struggling to understand, and I find it hard to believe something like this has happened. Was it paranormal, or can it be explained? I wish I could honestly chop it up to being an intruder, because if not, what being follows me home? Did it leave? Will it stay? I'm calling someone to cleanse the house and will update. From one skeptic to another, please don't make fun of believers. I did, and it wasn't until I understood the possibilities of what lies unseen that might make me change my mind. Back in high school, my friends and I had this twisted habit of hanging out near graveyards at night. It wasn't something we'd advertise, but it was thrilling in a dark, forbidden sort of way. We'd sit on the cold, uneven gravestones and trade ghost stories, trying to creep each other out with the creepiest tales we could think of. One night in particular stands out though. We were sitting on a crumbling stone wall, covered in moss. All of us were laughing nervously and trying to outdo each other with the scariest stories we remembered. But that night, something in the air felt off, like the graveyard itself was watching us. As I told my story, my eyes kept flicking towards the corner of the cemetery, where the older, more weathered graves sat in near darkness. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a trick of the moonlight or the shadow of a tree. But then it happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure slowly rise from one of the graves, not like someone getting up from a bench, but like someone slowly pushing themselves up from the ground after lying flat. The figure was tall and hunched. It moved in a way that seemed unnatural. It was the way a corpse might rise from the earth itself, slow and deliberate, as if it had been there for ages. My heart dropped to my stomach. I blinked hard, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the darkness, but no. The figure moved, taking long, slow steps towards the rear gate of the cemetery. It wasn't walking, but stalking. I could feel it in my bones. I whipped my head around to look at my friends, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see that?" All of them nodded, their faces pale, eyes wide with the same horror that had gripped me. The air felt thick and suffocating. Without another word, we bolted. We didn't even hesitate. We sprinted as fast as we could, our hearts pounding in our chest like they may burst. The sound of our frantic footsteps echoed through the graveyard as we pushed ourselves harder and faster, not daring to look back. I could feel the fear crawling up my spine. When we finally reached the edge of the graveyard and turned the corner, we kept running until we were far from that cursed place, gasping for air. But one of our friends, the one who had been closest to the figure, didn't seem all right. He was sweating profusely. His face pale, his breath shallow, and over the next few days he became sick. He had a fever that wouldn't break for 3 whole days. None of us knew what to make of it, but we chalked it up to the adrenaline and the shock. Then a few weeks later, we found out something that made my skin crawl. The man in the graveyard, the one we saw rising from the earth, wasn't just a random ghost or spirit. He was a real guy. He had been seen near that same graveyard for years, and it turns out he had been living by the grave of his deceased wife, sleeping next to it every night. The grave we saw him rise from had been hers. He never left. He was haunted and consumed by grief, so much so he spent his nights in the cemetery to be as close to her as possible. The shock of learning this hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt like this confusing mix of emotions, fear, yes, but also sadness for the man. He was broken, a shell of a person, living in his own twisted form of mourning. It was one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced, and even after knowing the truth, I couldn't shake that feeling every time I thought back to that night. My mind couldn't process what we saw or what we'd learned. The figure, the way it moved, it never felt right. It was as if we had witnessed something far beyond our understanding. To this day, I don't know if I'm more terrified of what we saw, or the heartbreaking truth behind it. All that I know is that the figure in the graveyard still haunts me, not in the way I thought it would, not in the ghostly terror that lingers, but in the sorrow, knowing death is something we cannot escape. When I was a young teenager, my mum and I developed a somewhat unusual hobby: visiting graveyards to take photographs of headstones for a website that helped families who couldn't visit their loved ones' graves. I can't quite remember what the site was called now, but it was one of those websites where people would request photos of specific graves. At the time, it seemed like a pretty harmless, even peaceful activity. We were used to cemeteries at this point, accustomed to the quiet. On one particular day, though, it would shake me to my core. We had recently learned that one of my mum's close friends had passed away in a horrific car accident. She, her husband, and their young son had lost their life instantly in a crash with a tractor-trailer. It was beyond devastating. My mum was trying to cope, and we decided to visit the cemetery where they were buried, hoping to pay our respects and offer some comfort. We had been to several cemeteries at this point, so we were comfortable with the process by now. We knew how to find the right sections where the older graves were, and how to navigate the sprawling, often overgrown grounds. We decided to split up and search for their graves, hoping to cover more ground. We never did find them though, but during our wandering we stumbled upon a set of graves that seemed oddly familiar. A couple and their son, who had also passed away not too long before. They had died unexpectedly, and we both stopped in our tracks when we saw their markers, a kind of eerie synchronicity that made the moment feel almost too perfect. It wasn't planned. We hadn't even been looking for them. But here we were, standing at this random gravesite, staring at the stones as if something was drawing them to us. For a few moments there was complete silence. It was as if the world stopped spinning, and all the noise and momentum had been sucked into a vacuum. Even the wind seemed to pause. And then something happened that would forever remain etched in my mind. A hummingbird appeared over the graves in front of us, fluttering its wings with such speed and grace that we couldn't have possibly missed it flying over. It seemed ordinary at first, a tiny, fragile creature darting through the air. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. Before our eyes, in the span of a few moments, the hummingbird seemed to transform into a butterfly, The delicate wings shifted and morphed, the shape altered. We blinked, both of us in disbelief, and barely had time to process it because as quickly as the butterfly had appeared, it changed again. Now it appeared to be a pale white moth, its wings fluttering slowly. And then, just as abruptly as it had come, the moth vanished into the air. The world rushed back in that instant like someone had flipped a switch. The sound of the wind, the distant rustling of leaves, and the quiet hum of life returned as if nothing had happened at all. But we were both frozen, stunned by what we'd just seen. It simply didn't make sense. We turned to each other. Did you see that? I asked, barely able to get words out. Yeah, my mum replied, her face pale and eyes wide with disbelief. I saw it too. We started describing the details of what we had seen, each of us recounting the sequence of events, how the hummingbird appeared, how it morphed into a butterfly and then a moth. What was strange was that we both knew things the other hadn't mentioned, details that couldn't have been shared without both of us witnessing the same thing at the same time. It was impossible to explain, and yet we both knew deep down that what we saw was real. For years I couldn't shake the memory of that moment. I tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was some kind of optical illusion, a trick of the light, or maybe even some weird natural phenomenon. But deep down I knew it wasn't any of those things. I wasn't the type to believe in the paranormal, but there was no logical explanation for what had happened. It felt like we had witnessed something otherworldly, something that blurred the lines between the living and the dead. I think we saw their spirit, or some form of their energy lingering at the grave, reaching out to us in some way. Maybe they were trying to communicate, or maybe it was just a moment of transition. I'll never know for sure, but even now, as I reflect on that experience, I can't help but feel that something deeper and more mysterious was at play. I'm usually the first to reject supernatural explanations, the kind of person who relies on science and logic. But there's no way I can explain what happened that day. It's a memory that haunts me, one that I still think about regularly no matter how hard I try to move past it. Sometimes I still wonder if the spirits of the departed are always closer than we think, watching, and just waiting for us to notice. This happened on the 15th of May in 2006, in a small, forgotten Illinois town where I grew up. There's an old cemetery tucked away behind a dense curtain of trees, a place I often wander through just to clear my head. The mossy headstone leaned at odd angles, cracked and worn by time. It was always quiet there. I usually visited in the early afternoon after stressful days, because I found comfort in that stillness. The sun slanted warmly across the graves, and the world felt safe. But that day I was late. By the time I pulled into the back lot, it was nearly 4:30 p.m. The light was already beginning to thin, pooling golden grey across the cracked asphalt. I didn't think twice. I had been here countless times, and the peace of the place had never betrayed me. Before getting out of the car, I scanned the cemetery as I always did. Habit. There was only one way out, through the front gate, and a tall, barbed wire fence wrapped around the perimeter like a warning. Behind the fence, a sheer drop led down to a river. No shortcuts, no easy escapes. And satisfied that I was alone, I stepped out into the chilly air. The walk started as usual. I wove between the crooked stones, brushing fingertips across names long forgotten. A crow cawed up from somewhere unseen, and a cold breeze stirred the dead leaves. After about 90 minutes of wandering with twilight creeping fast across the sky, I returned to my car to rest. I debated calling it a night. The deepening shadows made the place feel less friendly, but stubbornness pushed me to walk one last loop. I was about 2 blocks from my car, the fading light turning everything blue and soft, when a sharp male voice cut through the silence. "Hey!" I froze, Every hair on my body stood on end. It wasn't possible. I'd been alone. I knew I'd been alone. Slowly I turned towards the voice. There, standing near the fence at the cemetery's back edge, was a tall, thin man. He wore a dark blue uniform, perhaps coveralls. It was too dim to tell now. His face was pale and indistinct, as though the fading light couldn't quite cling to him. When he saw me, he lifted his arm in a slow, deliberate wave, then began running towards me in long, determined strides. Panic crashed over me like cold water. An instinct screamed for me to run. I bolted, cutting between headstones, my feet slipping on patches of damp earth. I didn't dare look back. Breathless, I flung myself into the car, locking the doors with shaking hands, my heart hammered against my ribs. After a minute gathering a thin thread of courage, I started the engine and decided to drive through the cemetery, to find him, to prove something to myself. But there was no one, not on the path, not hiding among the stones. Nowhere. I circled the grounds twice. It was impossible. He couldn't have outrun me, and there was nowhere to hide. The only way out was the front gate, and I'd have seen him. But the cemetery remained empty, smothered by an unnatural silence. Only when the terrible realization sank in that the man had not been human, or at least not alive. When I first saw him, he looked solid, real, no transparency, no ghostly glow, just a man moving towards me with eerie purpose. But now knowing the truth, the memory of his slow wave, the way the shadows clung too thickly to him chilled me even more. I drove home that night without ever looking back, and I never returned to that cemetery again.
My dad's family has owned a funeral home and cemetery for many generations. The old office was so small that it is now used as a storage shed for our equipment, and a bigger and better office was built. It's a blessing in the sense that I will always have a job, but it's definitely not for everyone. I am not the type that gets scared or uncomfortable when it comes to death. In fact, being in this field has made me more responsible when it comes to end-of-life decisions. At 32, I can tell you that I already have my plans laid out, so there isn't a burden on my family if anything were to happen. I'm sure some of my friends think that I'm weird, but hey, life is short and you never know what will happen tomorrow. I also feel like I am more open-minded and in tune with those that have passed and the paranormal because of this. My mother has always helped out at the funeral home, but ghosts and spirits have never been her thing. Even dealing with death every day, she didn't believe any of it was real. I say this because I couldn't really talk to her about what I witnessed, but my father believed all of it. In fact, we joke about having some frequent ghosts in our facility or on the grounds and speak about them as if they were living customers right in front of us. I feel our place has become locally popular because of the paranormal activity alone. Because I am so connected to them, they really hold a place close to me like family, and I wanted to share a few that I will always remember. When I was younger, my parents still brought me to the funeral home so that they could watch me, but when there was a service going on, I was at my grandparents' or aunt and uncle's. I appreciate them wanting me to understand that this is a normal thing, but also didn't want me to see anything a child shouldn't. So, I often saw people coming and going to the funeral home, caskets and urns coming in, and sometimes other random items that families might request. One in particular that stood out to me when I was about 6 was a really gorgeous blue casket, but it was also very small. We all know what that means. As I saw my parents setting up the room, I noticed the decals they were putting on the casket which were different superheroes. My mom had explained to me that it was for a little boy that really liked them, and his parents asked for his final resting place to look like his room. So they dressed it up just as they wanted before they brought him out for the services and before the family arrived to set up the rest, like personal gifts and pictures, and I was ushered off to my aunt's and things continued as normal. After a few days, I was back there, playing in the back room and watching a movie, when I noticed that my dolls were falling off the small desk that was in there. Thinking nothing of it, I just picked them up and put them back. This actually happened twice more, and at that age, I was just getting annoyed and yelled, "Stop it!" It didn't happen again after that, but my dad had walked in and asked what happened. I told him what was going on when he smiled and said, "Maybe we should ask nicely next time," and then he walked out, but left the door open that time. After a few minutes of getting back to my movie, I realized this, and I look over to the door. That's when I saw a young boy wearing a long blue cape just standing there. Not knowing what to do, I just said hi, but he continued to stand there. I tried talking to him more, but he would never respond. So, I got up and closed the door, with him standing there. And a while later, my mom came in and asked how I was doing, and that's when I brought up the little boy. She said there weren't any boys there and asked what he looked like, and after describing him to her, the look on her face changed to one of concern, and she just left the room. As I got older, I learned that my mom thought my dad told me about the little boy that was in the blue casket, or that I saw him because that was exactly what he looked like, down to the cape. Over time, my dad and I both got used to seeing the little boy. He became a little bit mischievous, and at times, just like my dolls, things would get moved, things would go missing, only to reappear right where they last were, or things would get knocked down. I finally found out his name so I could address him properly, and from there, it was as if I could communicate with him. I would ask him, "Charlie, where did my pen go?" And it would be in my seat or something. However, unlike some of the others, he's the only kid that I've seen, and my dad and I are the only ones to see or experience his presence. The other experience occurred as a young adult. The cemetery is open all day for anyone to come and go as they please. Some people go by themselves or with another person, or where I've seen a whole group of people practically trying to have a party or celebration for their loved ones. We usually let them be and give them their privacy until close, and when we're closing, we walk or drive around and let everyone know so that they can start heading out. After one particular service, there was a woman that stayed around long after the service was over. I knew it was the same woman because of her outfit. She was in a long black dress that was flowy towards the bottom because you could see the bottom of it move with the wind. It looked like it had either lace sleeves with attached gloves or full-length gloves. She also had one of those small cocktail hats that had a long black lace veil over her face. She had a long dark brown hair that was all pulled to the side over her shoulder. And she stood there holding her hands in front of her, staring at the plot. She was still there when we started making our rounds. It was closer to the front, so I decided to walk over to her, hoping that I could comfort her as well. And as I got closer to her, I heard one of the groundskeepers holler out for me. I turned around, giving them a look of, "Seriously?" because I felt it was rude to shout like that, but by the time that I turned back around, the woman was gone. I looked around for a moment trying to see if I could find her, but she was nowhere. So I turned around to walk back towards the groundskeeper, and I was about to tell him to not shout like that when he apologized and said he thought that it was okay since there was no one around. That's when I immediately mentioned the woman that was standing there, and his only response was, "What woman?" And at first I was confused, but it quickly clicked in my mind. I apologized to him and again just advised to avoid shouting on the grounds while we were open. We finished up for the evening and started to leave when I was driving by the side of the grounds and saw this woman standing there again. I had to know for sure what I was seeing, so I pulled over. I walked up to the fence line and stared at her for a few seconds. And after a while, I watched her turn around, walk off behind our big center oak tree, and then she was gone. And I drove around as far to the other side so I could see if she just went over to the other side, but she wasn't there. The next day, I went in and checked the books to see whose plot she was at. The plot belonged to a gentleman that was born in the 50s, and his wife and children survived him, so I was stumped as to who this woman would be. I started going back through the records to learn and found out his mother had passed away when he was still a child, and you guessed it, she was buried here as well. I went to find her plot and learned that it was on the opposite side of that oak tree. My guess is that she was here and was waiting to meet her son again. I still see her in passing, but I always let her have her space. It doesn't seem like she wants company, so I respect her space and try to tell others as well the best that I can. We have had a few people say that they've seen her, and we've had a small talk for those that I know that are gifted like me. So, these were two experiences that have stuck with me since my time here, especially since they are two recurring events. It's not hard to open up and realize that we are not alone here, especially in my field. I feel it has drawn me closer to the paranormal, and I welcome the opportunity to possibly learn about someone's life and help celebrate it. Back in the 90s, I used to work at a cemetery. I helped with the dirty work of digging the graves, lowering caskets, and helping with the upkeep of the fields. It was an easy enough job, and we hardly dealt with the customers, so we were pretty much left to ourselves as long as we got the job done and did it respectfully. I also typically only worked during the day, which I was fine, because some of the things that I witnessed were weird and creepy enough that I didn't need to know what happened at night. So, as mentioned, there were definitely some unforgettable events. We've had some edgy teens break in and run around the plots. We had a naked guy sleeping on a grave once, and someone even brought a gun, demanding we let him in after we had closed. So, it's not uncommon, but you still remember them. But there was one that messed me up for a very long time and actually led to me quitting. While we were working out on the grounds, we may occasionally see customers come and go, setting up services, making payments, and etc. We get all the work done on the plots the night before, so that way we didn't have a huge hole open during business hours. We had a truck that also came and always parked on one side of the cemetery that delivered flowers and other lawn supplies. And right as the truck was pulling in, there was a car that sped into the lot, cutting off the truck and stopped right where the truck usually parked. It made no sense. There was a whole parking lot and they chose to stop there. I started walking up to the fence to ask the person to move their car, but also expecting pushback just by the way they drove in. A woman frantically got out of the car in sweatpants and a hoodie and also a messy bun, and she was looking around. I kindly asked her if she could park in one of the actual spots, as that side was for the truck, not to mention a no parking zone technically. She immediately started yelling at me about how dare I ask something so inconsiderate and, "Do you know why I'm here? I just lost my father," and so on. I immediately shuddered because I knew this was going to be brought up to the people inside, and I couldn't really say anything to her because of the situation. So I just apologized and I walked away as she continued yelling. Someone did come out a little later and asked me what happened, and I explained it all to them. Surprisingly, they understood and agreed that while it was common for people to come in still distraught, she was a little overboard. They said every time they would ask a question about what they wanted in the services, like the burial or cremation, visitation, type of flowers, and etc., she would burst into tears. They would try to calm her down and she'd be fine answering, until they asked another question. They said the whole process was exhausting, which told me a lot because this person never complained about their job. I let it go and then moved on, thinking that I'd probably not see this person again. A few days later, we were digging the plots as normal, and then we cleaned up the edges. We made sure the grass looked nice along the edges and things like that, when, lucky me, that woman shows up, walking towards me. I hold my breath expecting her to go off on me, but I kept my cool and greet her. She approached me smiling and asked if there was a plot number whichever. I pulled up my sheet to confirm, and she told me that this was her father's. She then apologized for her reaction the other day and explained that it just had been hard for her since she took care of her dad, and he was the only one that supported her too. I was polite because, just as expected, she was just going through the stages of loss and everyone grieves differently. I told her that it was okay and gave her my condolences. She said that she just wished that it was her instead because more people cared about her dad than her. Not knowing a damn thing about this woman, I tried to say that it wasn't true, and being in this field of work, no pun intended, you may not think many people care about you, but the services always say otherwise, and that she had to continue on for her dad. I don't know if what I said helped her or not, but she cried a little bit. She hugged me and thanked me and started walking away. Right before though, she turned and asked me what time the cemetery closed, so I gave her the hours. I went home and told my wife about the woman, and she said that I did a good thing. She actually told me on the first encounter that she was probably going through a lot and not to judge someone based on that encounter. I suppose she was right, because that was definitely a different person that I met that day. So not only do we dig graves, but we also help lower the caskets and bury them. So the next day was going to be the services for her father. I got up like I do every morning. I get ready for work, kissed my wife goodbye, and I headed out for the day. I like getting there early to do the weed whacking, so that way it's out of the way and there's no chance of disturbing any visitors. The owner is usually already there getting things in order on days of services, so I walked into the office and talked with him for a few minutes before. I was one of the manager-like people at that time, so I had keys to the cemetery as well. The owner asked me if I had seen his keys, because they usually left the keys to the cemetery gate in his office, but they weren't there. I said I hadn't and double-checked that I just had mine. They said that they probably just left it somewhere, as he had done that in the past, and then excused me to get to work. I went to the shed to grab the weed whacker, and then I headed out. And as I was walking around and getting closer to the plot that we had just dug the other day, I noticed the grass looking disturbed, like something was placed in it because it was flattened. I got angry at first, thinking it was another kid screwing around, and this woman was going through enough. I didn't want something else to happen, so I started walking up to it to see what had happened. Well, I wish it was just some kids. But I found the woman laying in the grave in a black dress and blood all over her wrist. Not knowing what to do, I immediately started yelling for the owner, and I jumped in the hole. The ground was damp from blood, and she was already pale, cold, and unresponsive. Thankfully, Henry heard me and came out and called 911 and then brought me a ladder to get us out. When the paramedics arrived, I heard them say that she had already lost a lot of blood, but that she would be okay, and then they were gone. I actually took the rest of the day off. I called my parents and my 2 sisters to let them know that I loved them. That really hit me hard. This woman really didn't feel like she was worth it, or that it was worth it to stay around, and felt this way was the only option that she had. No one should feel that alone. If it wasn't for her shallow groan, I would have thought that she was dead. But knowing she was close enough to that scared me enough. If I didn't come earlier, who knows how long it would have been before she was found. Thankfully, she did live though. We learned that she broke in through a back room window and then stole Henry's keys. I'm also thankful that he didn't press charges on her, but I heard the funeral for her father was a little off. I had to quit shortly after this. The first time I really talked to any of the customers, got to know them even that little bit, and then having to save their life was really too much for me. I found out what hospital she was at, and my wife and I thought that it was a good idea to send her flowers and a gift. I hope my words did something for her, something to keep her going, because it seemed like she just needed someone to support her again, or let her know that she wasn't alone. If you take anything from this, just let it be to be kind to people, because you never know what they're going through.
Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the stories narrated by Miss Creepy Tales, feel free to check out her channel. A link can be found in the description. And for more videos from me, feel free to check out the links on screen now. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.